am Dr. Kelly OMD, your board certified OBGYN and healthcare executive, here to help you live your healthiest and wealthiest life. And tonight we have a special guest who is on the circle back, Dr. B. She has just completed her chief residency at Naval Medical Center San Diego. She is now a staff dermatologist and she's waiting for her board results to come, but I'm going to guarantee you that she is the business. She is a boss, which means she has already passed her boards, because we're going to call that into existence for her and know that it is happening. So Dr. B, tell us a little bit about yourself and the top 3 things you want us to know.
Yeah, it's great to be back, Dr. Kelly. Hello, everybody. It's good to see everyone tonight. You may see an appearance by my dog, Brewster, at some point. He is a 100-pound Doberman, but he still thinks he's a lap dog, so you'll probably see him from time to time. Tonight, we're going to be talking about skincare. And so my top 3 takeaways are going to be that skincare does not need to be complicated when it comes to showers, bathing, soaps, perfumes, all of that kind of stuff. A lot of times less is actually more. So we'll talk through that. Number 2 would be that skincare does not need to cost you an arm and a leg. You just need to know what products and ingredients are really important and what you should be looking for on the labels. And then know what is all that extra fluff that, is there to make things look pretty and get you to spend a little bit more. And then finally, and probably most important for me, is that SPF is really your BFF. It's not just something we put on t-shirts for dermatologists. Your skincare daily and keeping yourself protected from the UV radiation is really going to put you leagues ahead. That way you're not having to kind of play catch up afterwards. So if you had to do one thing, make sure you're protecting your skin to start.
I love it. I love it. And just to do a little caveat there, as I mentioned, yes, she did graduate from Naval Medical Center San Diego, but what she is saying tonight is reflective only of herself and none of the organizations that she works for. So we're going to go from there. And then just to let y'all know, you see Viva Life SPF me all the time. And I will tell you that SPF me stands for spiritual, physical, financial, mental, and emotional health and well-being. And the way I got it was because one day, like my Dr. B dermatologist told me to, I was putting on my SPF to protect from skin cancer. And I said, we need to make sure that those 5 pillars are protecting us from any diseases, acute or chronic, as well as things that can happen to us spiritually, physically, financially, mentally, and emotionally. And so that's where the SPF in Viva Life comes from, because we got to protect ourselves. But that being said, Dr. B, go ahead and give us your presentation, because I know you got a lot of gold nuggets to drop, and there's going to be lots of questions because our Viva Lifers always have them. So Viva Lifers and our guests, y'all get ready, but Dr. B is going to take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Kelly. So I'll try and keep it relatively brief because I love to be able to have the kind of question and answer back and forth. I think we all kind of learn a lot from that. But going through kind of those takeaways and breaking it down, when we talk about skincare, I think it can be very daunting sometimes because, you walk down even the grocery store aisle or you walk through Sephora or wherever, and there's just a million products. And a lot of times it can be very overwhelming to be like, what do I actually need? And like, what is my skin going to react to? And you hear from patients all the time of like, oh, like my skin's really sensitive. And, by the time you're using 5-6 products, it's really hard to tell what's making you break out. And so, kind of making that a simplified process, I think is really huge. I usually start with some basic questions for my patients, and that's usually going to start with like, what's your bathing habit like? I think we all assume that whatever we're doing is just what the norm is. And, most times you're not asking your friends like, hey, like how often do you actually shower? Or like, do you wash your hair every day? Or kind of like, what's your routine? And I would say that in most cases in America, we tend to shower almost too much. I think that there's kind of this norm of like showering at least once a day, if not twice a day. And it depends on what you're doing. I usually tell my patients that like, unless you're doing like an extreme workout and you're covered in sweat and dirt and grime, like there's really no reason for you to need to be showering like twice a day. The more you shower, the more you're going to be stripping off oil from your skin and making your skin a little bit drier. And the drier your skin is, the more you're kind of playing catch up in terms of trying to replace that moisture so that you're not having little cracks and tears, because all those little micro kind of traumas and cracks and tears leave your skin vulnerable for getting, allergic reactions or getting irritated by things. And then eventually kind of going down the road where you're like, I don't know what's irritated me, but now I'm just all red. So I would say kind of limiting showers is big. Another thing is looking to see how much time you're spending in the shower, or if you're using a lot of baths. Like I'm not opposed to baths, but if you're sitting in a tub for a long time, you're just kind of like getting all your skin oil off and making yourself more and more dry, and potentially irritating your skin more. Temperature is really important as well. Hot showers are going to make you itchier and kind of rip that skin oil off even quicker. And then the last thing that I usually ask people is like, how are you applying your soap? Like, are we talking loofahs? Are we talking like pumice stones? Are we doing like the little back scrubbies? And I have a lot of patients that are very proud to be like, oh yeah, I exfoliate like every day. I use my little hand scrubber and I get in there and I'm like, okay, I just want you to throw that out. Because in most cases, actually just like a little bit of bar soap with just your hand is going to be enough to remove whatever impurities you need. Obviously, if you did a mud run that day and you're, really covered in grass stains and everything, then you can get in there and scrub. But in most cases, you're probably just going to induce a little bit more trauma and make yourself more dry. Right after you get out of your shower, I always remind folks that like in that first 3 minutes, right when you get out is when you want to apply your moisturizers because your pores are open and everything is kind of ready to just suck that stuff in. If you wait until things kind of dry out a little bit, now it's a little cracked and you're trying to play catch up again. So if you can, have that bottle of lotion or cream or whatever your moisturizer is and get that right when you get out of the shower. The third thing would be kind of making sure you just know what to buy. So there's lots of different products on the market. I think it's important to know that like the cosmeceutical industry, it's not regulated like medications. And so, it's very easy to have a lot of claims of like, this collagen is going to plump my skin up or this and that, and kind of knowing what you actually need. Something I'm really passionate about talking to my patients is knowing what's out there and knowing what's kind of bogus, because I think that in many cases, industry sometimes preys on folks because we all want to be young and beautiful and plump our faces and look young for forever. But any of these collagen supplements that you're eating, and most of them that are topical, are really not going to get in there and do what you think they're going to do. They're usually packaged very nicely and they feel nice on your skin and they probably smell amazing. And so like if that is a wellness thing for you and you want to use it, I'm not opposed to it. But for me, myself, and I usually try and save a buck and buy what's easy. So certain brands that are really standard that you'll see at a lot of places are like the Cetaphil and the CeraVe. Things that tend to be more bland are actually safer for your skin, because a lot of people actually have allergies to fragrances and other types of additives in there. So, keeping things more simple is going to be better for you in the long run. So looking for, the kind of boring, bland white lotions that you can kind of rub in and just make sure they buff are going to be great for you. The other thing is I would say a lot of the extra products like toners, things like that. A lot of times in cosmeceutical brands, I feel like they end up selling like, here's your cleanser, here's your toner, or here's, whatever your moisturizer is. Toners, I think a lot of us were raised on this idea that like, oh, when you get out of the shower, there's still dirt on your face. And what most toners are made out of is they're made out of alcohol-based products. And so when you put them on your face, of course, you're going to see a little bit of, dirt and be like, oh, wow, like I really clearly needed this. But really, you're just stripping a lot of like dead skin cells and you're stripping a lot of your face. And that tightness that you feel is from your skin being really dry. But I think it like, for a lot of us, it feels like, ooh, it's tight, like it's doing something, I've done something. But then it's kind of funny because you're setting yourself back just to have to use the moisturizer. So in most cases, like you probably don't need a toner. And then finally, I would say, just talking about SPF, and I love that Dr. Kelly brought this up too, because I think there's this huge misnomer, especially in populations of skin of color. And for those of us that are kind of blessed to have a little bit more brown, we tan a little bit more easy. And so the thought is that like, oh, like SPF is if you're going to go outside and you're going to burn, like that's why you use it. But it's not just about the burning, it's about photo aging and it's about photo damage in general. And so I would say that I have patients, skin of color, who develop skin cancer. So like it's a huge, I think, misnomer that like just because you're tan or just because you don't burn a lot means that you're not going to be able to age, and so or develop skin cancers down the road. And so I think it's really important to just work that into your routine. They come in lots of different forms. I have a lot of patients that will complain about like, oh, I don't really like the feel of SPF on my face. And to them, I say, there are, brush on mineral powders that go on like a little highlighter and it's really great. You just kind of brush it on. I find it to be great for little girls that don't want you rubbing stuff on their face. You're like, I'm going to put a little of your makeup on. And then they are right there to be like, oh yeah, I want my highlighter. Like go ahead and put that on. So, there are different, formulas and things like that you can use. There are even oral supplements that you can take that gives you kind of like an internal SPF that are really great antioxidants. But I think working that into your everyday life is going to help you down the road, because the more you take care of your skin now, the less it's going to age, the less you're going to be trying to go to the Sephora and buy all these collagen-based products and everything else to try and like catch up for what you had. So prevention is key, and just making sure that you're taking care of yourself.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I love everything you talked about because we're going to have questions about everything you just said and even more. So, Viva Lifers and our guests, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat or raise your hand so you can come off the mute function so we can have you ask some of these questions. Because I tell you, like I've told you before, it is not very easy to get a dermatologist to take time out of her busy schedule to do this for us. And we're so grateful to have you here. And we know that you're just an amazing dermatologist, physician, woman. I mean, just in general. Thank you so much. So that being said, of course, I have questions that people have already sent in to us. So thank you for that. One, you talked about the SPF and skin cancer. And of course, I was just flying across the country and watched the Bob Marley movie about him getting skin cancer and it being on his foot. And let me tell you, my brothers called me, my god brothers called me and told me that their dad has skin cancer. And guess where it started? On his foot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So could you just tell us just briefly about that and, what things we can do to prevent and what do we need to be looking for on our feet? Because clearly this is sometimes where people of color get it.
That is a fantastic question. So we know that in populations of skin of color, we tend to see acral melanomas, which mean basically like melanomas that arise either on your palms or on your soles of your feet, tend to be more common. There's a little bit of a debate kind of, I think, within the dermatologic world in terms of like, are these things only showing up on the feet, or is it kind of we find them later stage because again of this kind of misnomer within the skin of popular population that like, oh, like we don't get skin cancers, we don't need to be checking. I think it's probably a little bit of both because they do find that there are certain specific mutations that usually are in those types of like acral melanomas that are different than what we'll find on kind of like trunk ones later. But at the same time, I think it's on a spot that most people aren't looking at the bottoms of their feet. And so I think in that sense, just simply like checking your skin, and looking everywhere. People a lot of times when I do skin checks are really surprised because, they assume that you're going to go head to toe and they leave their socks on. And I always end up having to tell people like, can you take your socks off? I need to see your feet. And a lot of times people are really embarrassed. They're like, oh, like my feet stink. Like I don't really, I'm like, I just need to see the bottom of your foot because I don't know if anybody else is looking at the bottom of your foot. And so things that you're looking for, and it goes with anything, with any pigmented skin lesion, but especially looking at things that are on your palms or on your soles, you're looking for things that are like irregularly shaped, have a lot of colors or like multiple colors, things that are growing, things that are new, and things that tend to be symptomatic. So if you are generally we can make new moles until we're about like 30s, 40s. If you are above that age and suddenly notice a new pigmented spot, like you should probably get that checked. Like you probably shouldn't be making like new moles at that point. And especially if you're looking at stuff in non-sun exposed areas. So like on the bottom of your foot or like on your butt or something like that. If you notice something like that and you're like, that's not seeing a lot of sun, like I should probably get that checked. When I say symptomatic, it can be something as simple as like this spot itches and it's just kind of new and it kind of is irritating, or, things that are painful, things that just kind of you notice. I would get those checked. Things that bleed easily, you want to get those checked. But the American Academy of Dermatology has like the ABCDEs of melanoma. So it's like A is for asymmetry. So basically, if you look at a spot, it should be about the same if you cut it in half. If it's got like doesn't really quite fit like a taco together, like that means it's a little asymmetrical and you should probably get it checked. B is for borders. So if something looks like it's like been smeared on your skin or it's kind of a smudge, that should probably be checked. Things should have really defined borders. Sometimes when you're looking at stuff on your feet, because of the pressure points of like how your foot steps, sometimes things can look a little bit more smudged, but it takes a dermatologist with like a microscope to look at it and be able to see exactly where the pigment is. So like if you have something that looks like a sponge on your foot, don't just assume that it's because you're stepping on it, like still have someone check that out. C is for color. So like I said, multiple colors. We're talking like things that are really dark, or I like to remind people too, like if you had a brown spot that's suddenly turning white, that's also not a good sign because sometimes it means that there is something bad there and your body's now attacking it. And so it's going away. So you should get that checked too. D is for diameter. So we usually say like bigger than a pencil eraser. It's getting kind of big. You should probably get that checked. And then E is just for evolution. So something that's changing. It's new. It looks different. It's changed since you were a kid. You know, those are all things that you should be getting checked out. So I would really recommend like checking your hands, checking your feet. In our skin of color population too, a lot of times we can get this like longitudinal melanonychia, which is a very fancy word for basically like brown streaks in your fingernails, which sometimes can be totally normal. And if you're kind of like, oh, like I've had this my whole life and they're all very regular and my family has them and it hasn't changed, then you probably don't need to be too worried. But sometimes when people develop that, it's because there's a melanoma like in the base of where their nail is, and that's what's causing that streak to grow out. So something definitely worth checking. And especially if you see a kind of streak in your nail and you notice that on the nail bed, kind of like where your nail comes out from your skin, there's color on the skin. We call that Hutchinson sign. And that usually means like there's something growing there and you should get that checked out. So just things to be aware of.
You know what's so wonderful about that? All that you just said. In med school, we learned the ABCDs of skin, and we're still using it today. So I'm excited to know that okay, we still got that in our mind, and you know those little things we learn in med schools make a huge difference. Because I do have physicians on here as well as healthcare practitioners and healthcare administrators, and people that are not in healthcare at all. And if everybody can learn just those, you know, ABCDE of skincare, can be somebody that actually saves somebody's life. So we're so excited that you mentioned that as well. So we have a few questions and they were like rolling in. So we're going to try and get through as many as possible. First one is any products for dry hands that you recommend?
Yes. Okay. So my favorite product, or I would say my favorite ingredient for dry hands, is going to be anything that has dimethicone in it. Dimethicone is like dimethicone. So if you look for products that have dimethicone, that's going to be the best thing, because dimethicone is basically a compound that gives you almost like an invisible glove. So it creates like a little bit of a barrier. So it's going to lock in moisture, but also prevent you from losing moisture. So a lot of us in healthcare, we have really dry hands because we're alcohol washing our hands like every 5 minutes as we walk into patient rooms. And I find that, you know, it really strips a lot of the moisture out of your hand. And unless you're, you know, putting on lotion after every single time you wash your hand, which generally isn't feasible kind of at work, finding a lotion that has dimethicone in it can be really helpful. The brands that I know carry it. So CeraVe now makes one. I think it's like it's called like the Healing Hand Cream or something, but CeraVe makes a product that has dimethicone in it, which I've tried and it's actually really nice. And it doesn't go on greasy. It's really actually nice. Maybe it's called like Therapeutic Hands. And then La Roche-Posay, which is a French dermatology brand that's available in like Target, Walmart, places like that. You can get online as well. They make one that has dimethicone in it, and theirs is called the Cicaplast, like Cicaplast. That's in a smaller bottle. It's basically the same product. The La Roche is going to be a little bit more expensive because I think they're just like a little bougier. They're like, we're French and we have thermal spring water, so their stuff tends to be a little bit more expensive. Also, very nice product, but you know you can totally do it with the CeraVe one. And then O'Keeffe's for working hands used to have dimethicone in it. They changed their formula, which is very annoying because that used to be the go-to. And so they had the O'Keeffe's that was like in a puck, like a little kind of hockey puck thing. And then they had a squeeze bottle one, and I can't remember which they took it out of. So again, like when you're going shopping, just make sure you're looking at the bottles and looking at the active ingredients, because if you know exactly what you're looking for, then you know you can kind of pick your brand, pick whichever is the best price point for you. But dimethicone is really what you're going to want if you have dry hands. The other trick that you can do that sounds like such a wise tale, but works fantastically, is you get yourself a pair of cotton gloves, and before you go to bed, you lather your hands up with Vaseline and you put the gloves on and you go to bed. You're going to be like, this is gross. And then you're going to wake up and pull it off and be like, oh my God, my hands are baby soft. So that works really well. That works really well for like cracked heels as well. So if you're, you know, it's summertime, a lot of people are out in flip flops, you know, the heels get a little cracky. So, you know, go ahead and put some Vaseline on. If you really want it to pack a punch, do a whole layer of Vaseline, wrap your foot in saran wrap, and then put a sock on. You will bless my name in the morning. I mean, it's good.
I love that because those are all the things my grandmother and my mother do.
Yes.
Really was riding. We're driving across country right now, and Francis has, you know, whatever going on with his feet. And I'm like, bro, we about to put some Vaseline and some socks on.
Yes.
It's gonna heal your feet. It's gonna heal your feet. But people ask a couple of things. So like you said, CeraVe is one of them that has a dimethicone in it. I know a lot of people who use Aveeno, so that's another one. And then A&D ointment actually has it in there as well. So you can go ahead and choose how much money you want to actually spend. I'm still
Exactly.
lean and keeping it simple and clean.
Mhm.
All right. So the next one, that was a great question. And thanks for the answer. Let's see. I saw Diane ask the question. Hold on. Do you have any? This is from Vicky. Do you have any specific brands you recommend SPF 50 or over? So, two questions. How much SPF concentration do we need? And then any specific brands that you recommend?
Sure. So generally the rule of thumb is that you want to be at least an SPF 30 or above. When you look at the difference between like an SPF 30 and an SPF 100, it seems like it would be a really massive difference. It's really not. When we look at like the biochemical curve in terms of like how SPF helps, the difference between SPF 30 and SPF 100 is really not that much. So what matters more is like reapplying and like knowing what type of sunscreen you're using. So sunscreens, it's not just about the SPF factor. You have to look and see, like, is this a chemical sunscreen or is this a physical sunscreen? The physical sunscreens are going to be everything that is marketed as like a mineral sunscreen. So like things with titanium dioxide in them, zinc oxide. You can think of them as like a rock that's been ground down really, really, really fine. And then you rub it on your skin so that when the light hits you, it basically reflects off the rock. The great thing about mineral sunscreens or physical blockers is that as long as they are on your skin, they work versus the chemical sunscreens. So the chemical sunscreens, if you look at the back of your bottles, it's going to be like the avobenzone, the oxybenzone, things like that. They're considered like broadband, broad spectrum coverage because they cover UVA and UVB radiation. The problem with the chemical sunscreens is that because it is a chemical, it's created to absorb radiation and then it basically dissipates. And so after 2 hours, it doesn't work anymore. So it's not even just about like, oh, I sweat it off. It's like, no, like it's done its job and it's not working anymore. So what you can do is you can always stack. So you can do, say, like if you put on a chemical sunscreen that's a spray, and then you put a physical sunscreen on top of it, you can do that. The other thing is when they do the studies in terms of like SPF, if you look at the actual studies, it's for like a 2-ounce serving of sunscreen, which is basically like a shot glass size of sunscreen, which if you think about like last time you took your kids to the pool, like none of us are probably putting on that much. So either you double it, like you do one layer and then you do another layer, or they do the studies with like people putting on sunscreen like cake frosting, which nobody really does. So I usually am kind of like if you're going to get something, you might as well get a physical blocker. So that's going to give you a little bit more bang for your buck. And then because there's not a huge difference between SPF 30 and SPF 100, some of my patients are like, all right, well, then I'll just use a 30. Versus my thought is like, well, why don't you just use the 100? Like, it's not, I think people have this thought that like, oh, if I use the SPF 100, I'm not going to get any tan at all. And I want at least a little color. Like, you're still going to get a little color. It blocks the UV radiation. You are still going to have a tanning process. Because I know that a lot of people want a little bit of that sun-kissed glow, like I'm half Vietnamese. I get dark in the summer too. I get it. But you don't want the skin cancer and you don't want the sun aging. So I would just use the higher SPF if you had to. In terms of brands of sunscreens that I like, there's a lot of different things out there. So me personally, I use a Supergoop mineral powder because I find it like, especially for us ladies, like once we've done our makeup in the morning, like I'm not about to like rub more lotion all over kind of set face. And so I like to use a mineral sunscreen powder. So Supergoop makes one. It's like SPF 30, and they make one that is just kind of a matte color, and then they make one that's got a little shimmer in it if you want to use it basically like a highlighter. I basically use it as my setting powder, and I have that in the morning, and then I keep it in my little fanny pack so that like before I get into the car, or if I'm gonna go outside or something like that, you can reapply it. I apply it on the back of my hands too because like as you're driving, like the backs of our hands tends to get really photo age just from even being in the car. Color Science, it's like COLRE Science. It's an online brand. They have a lot of really good sunscreens as well. They have one that's SPF 50 or 60 that's also a mineral based powder that you can brush on. It's a little bit pricey. I want to say it's like $60, but if you get that tube, like it'll last you about 6 months. So it's definitely worth it. And then in terms of other sunscreens, like Neutrogena makes some really nice ones. I love Neutrogena as a brand. CeraVe makes really good sunscreens. La Roche-Posay makes a lot of really good ones as well. If you have more sensitive skin, La Roche-Posay, I think, makes some really nice ones that blend in pretty nicely. And we've come a long way. It used to be that most of the minerals would leave that kind of like white, chalky cast, but a lot of them have gotten better about that. The other thing that you can do is if you have a little bit darker skin and you're worried about like, I don't really want to look like white and chalky, tinted sunscreens. Tinted sunscreens are amazing because they are mineral blockers, but because they have iron oxide in there to give them the tint, they block visible light as well. So maybe in the future, we'll do a little talk about melasma or like pigmentary kind of disorders, but tinted sunscreen is the best thing for that, because even the visible light can make melasma and stuff like that worse in skin of color. So a tinted sunscreen basically replaces your foundation and is going to give you the protection. La Roche makes a really nice tinted sunscreen that I like. So a lot of simple brands. There's some other like more niche ones that I've seen at kind of more of these cosmetic forums that are nice, but also I think like needlessly expensive. So I think that you can stick with like Neutrogena, CeraVe, things like that, and be totally fine.
Wonderful. So just the biggest thing in the, as far as the ingredients in there, just the fact that it says SPF at least 30, if
At
not
least
higher,
30.
at least 30. And then you were saying that within the sunscreen, you can use a mineral is better than other ones because the mineral lasts the full time.
Exactly.
And then I know we have a lot of women of color on here. So just some of the names that have been thrown out there for Black owned sunscreen or brands or anything like that. So we have Black Girl Sunscreen is one of them. Two is Bolden Skincare, as well as Fenty is on there as well. So if you wanted to know about specifically Black owned, we have that as well. So cool. Let's see. Another question. We have about 4 minutes left. So we're going to do kind of a speed round if possible. Looks like somebody says they use Black Girl sunscreen because it doesn't leave her skin chalky. So cool. And products to use. Oh, products to use to lighten acne or ingrown or dark spots.
Yes. Yes. I'll keep it quick. And if you have questions, you can always reach out to me too. If you have dark spots, hyperpigmentation, what you want to be using, or you want to use a tranexamic acid serum. We use oral tranexamic acid for melasma and hyperpigmentation, but that's something that you would have to be prescribed and can raise your risk of like blood clots and stuff like that. So like there's questions that we have to ask before you do that. But the topical serum available over the counter, it's like $20 at Target. And if you put that on every day, it will help to kind of lighten any sort of hyperpigmentation spots you have. And then the other thing that I would use is a vitamin C serum. Vitamin C serum can definitely help to lighten and brighten, and it's safe for topical use. What I would remind people is that it is not light stable. So like make sure you keep it in a cabinet, because if you leave it by the window, it's not really doing much for you anymore. So vitamin C serum and tranexamic acid serum. Kojic acid is another one that we know can help to lighten spots and is also available topically. And you can see like Sephora sell some, Target sell some if you're just looking for those ingredients. And then the one that you'll hear about a lot is the hydroquinone. So hydroquinone is like the classic, tried and true bleaching cream. It does work. It basically blocks the pathway that creates more pigment. The only thing about it is that if you overuse it, it can create permanent dark spots, and that's something called ochronosis. And ochronosis is not reversible. And so it just depends on where you're getting it from. Usually if we prescribe it, it'll be prescribed and be like, use this for max 6 months, and then you have to take a break. But, like you're moving to San Diego, other people can get medications from elsewhere. Like you can go down to Mexico and get this stuff ridiculously strong and buy it at a pharmacy and like not know that, oh, like this could give me ochronosis. And so I tend to stay away from it in my patients, just because if we're trying to treat dark spots, I really don't want to give you something that could potentially create permanent dark spots. Like I think that's kind of circular. I just don't like taking that risk. But it does work. And so some people will use that too.
Cool. And then let's see, we have, I'm living in the Philippines. Can you share thoughts on the effectiveness of rejuvenation products, especially when used in a tropical climate like the Philippines?
What kind of rejuvenation products specifically, or just so I can understand your question better?
Let's see. Cheryl, you can come off or you can put it in the chat. Let's see. For the face. Are you talking about rejuvenation products that, how you have, I don't know if it's Juvederm, or, you know,
like filler type things, like kind of like fillers, Botox type rejuvenation products, or are we
yeah,
talking
let's
about topicals?
just real quick, 30 seconds. What are your thoughts on Botox and Juvederm and all those?
I think Botox is great. I think preventative Botox is like the new thing right now. You know, if you get preventative Botox, you prevent yourself from getting wrinkles down the road. I love that Botox is not permanent. As a person that like has high anxiety, I like that you're like, oh, if I don't love it, like it'll wear off in 4 to 6 months. Fillers, I think it depends on who your injector is. I think fillers can be really incredible and do some like amazing kind of rejuvenation things that look very natural, but I think that they can also look really bad depending on who's using them, and how they're being injected. So like knowing who is going to be your injector and what they do, and also their understanding of facial anatomy, because whereas Botox isn't going to make you go blind. If somebody injects filler in the wrong spot, like you can have facial necrosis, like tissue dying off, and you can, if my biggest thing is like, don't let somebody do filler in your nose or like near your forehead, because like if it gets into your retinal artery, like you can go blind. And those are things that it depends on the state you're living in, because everybody has different regulations on like who can inject and what the regulations are for, you know, allowing you to do things. And it's something that can seem very easy, like, oh, I'm just going to plump up some cheeks, but like there are some serious complications that can come from it too. So I tend to be more cautious with filler. Botox, I'm like, if you drop your eyelid, it's going to look bad for a while. You know, people may ask if you had a stroke, but it will wear off, you know, versus, you know, you can't really reverse blindness. So just be careful with those things too.
Man, dropping nuggets. I love it. I love it. Okay, so we have another Dr. B on here. She's an orthopedic surgeon. So thank you for being on here. Often moles are some of the early age related changes for Black women. What is the best way to prevent or get rid of them? What about laser treatments and other interventions that work for darker skin? This is a great question because I feel like I am like being invaded by moles right now. So can you?
Yes. So in our skin color populations, we tend to see a lot of moles as we age, because it comes with hormonal changes. So I oftentimes joke with pregnant women that like pregnancy is like mole fertilizer. You know, you've got so much estrogen and stuff going on that like your moles start to get bigger and darker, and other moles that you had start to look weird, and then you can make new moles too. And then similarly in our skin of color population, for those of us that have a little bit more pigment, we a lot of times get something called DPN, which are like the dermatosis nigra papulosis. Sometimes people call them Morgan Freeman spots, which I think is like a little insensitive and weird, but at the same time, they're like, oh, I know what you're talking about. Morgan Freeman. Yeah, he's got those things. And so they're basically like very, very small, almost, people call them moles, but they're really tiny little seborrheic keratoses, which are like up just a benign skin growth. And so they can look like these tiny, almost like skin tag freckle type things. You can get rid of them. So laser is hard to get rid of them with, because in skin of color, anytime you're doing laser, you're putting heat on skin. And so you're risking giving someone hyperpigmentation in exchange for what you ablated off. So like, that's always something that you have to be careful about. What I tend to do is if I have folks that like really hate their like little DPNs and they want to get rid of them, I can hypercate them, which is basically using like a little electrocautery needle tip, and you can just kind of zap them and get rid of them. And that's going to be like the least amount of damage. If you have somebody that offers to like, oh, like I'll just freeze it for you, you can get rid of them with the liquid nitrogen. However, melanocytes, which are your pigment producing cells, are very, very sensitive to cold compared to like your other skin cells. So they are the first thing that's going to go. And so if you freeze it and there's a little bit of extra freezing that happens around them, you can also be trading them for like little tiny white spots, which on skin of color are going to be more noticeable than tiny little brown spots. So like, again, just kind of know, because I think people can very easily be like, oh, like I got the cryogen, and I'll just freeze them off for you. And like, if you do a light, again, like it just depends on like whose hands it's in, you know, like you can do it and do it well, but also if someone's just like going to town after them, you're probably going to end up with hypopigmentation spots, which sometimes is more noticeable. You can do like salicylic acid and other things to just try to like smooth them out. But in general, most times, if you're talking about like truly removing moles or like removing those kind of like little DPN spots, it's probably going to be more like you have to cut them off, burn them off, something like that. Like there's not really something that you can just kind of scrub them off with.
Love that question. And then from another one of our Viva Lifers, how important is it to switch shift products with the season and with age? And are there specific products targeted for mature skin? I like that, mature skin.
I like that. That's a very kind way of saying it, and I wish that you had talked to certain brands when they were naming their products. Gold Bond, I think, is terrible at naming products, and just came out with one that was like the crepey skin corrector, and I was like, why would you sell it like that for folks? But there are various products that are kind of made for mature skin. So sometimes what I think about for like mature or aging skin is that you tend to get little easier bruising. And so sometimes what you're seeing is a lot of that kind of, we call it, I hate to say this, the books will call it senile purpura, which basically means like old people bruises. You also sometimes hear it called like actinic purpura, so like sun damage bruises. But you see it a lot of times in aged skin just because you have less collagen, you have less, elastic tissue. And so like you bump into things and things just kind of bruise. There's a brand called Derm Mend that makes a lotion that has arnica oil in it, and arnica is really helpful in terms of like breaking down that heme and helping the bruising go away faster. So you could buy the Derm Mend, or you can just look for stuff that has arnica in it that's cheaper than the Derm Mend, because the arnica is really what's going to help with a lot of that kind of bruising. A lot of times too, in more mature skin, I tend to recommend things like urea creams or things that have lactic acid in them, because they're going to help to keep you more moisturized. As we age, we make a lot less skin oil. And so everything that I talked about in terms of like the showering and like the no loofahs and all this stuff, that gets more and more and more as we age, just because we're making less oil to begin with. So like, this is why, like, whenever people come in for skin checks, like your 80-year-olds are going to pull off their socks and there's going to be like a little plume of skin, just because like that just is what happens. Like we get drier as we age. And you really have to be on top of using the lotions. But if you use something that has lactic acid, so like lachydrin is one, or amlactin's another brand, or anything that has like urea cream or urea lotion, that's going to help to keep you even more moisturized. And I would agree that as you're going through seasons or just kind of seasons of life, like changing your products is totally valid. Sometimes people even can develop allergies to things that you've been using for years, because allergies develop when your body's been exposed to something and eventually decides, I don't really like this anymore. Or similarly, sometimes you've been using a product for years and the company changes the formulation and doesn't tell anybody. And so sometimes it's that. But knowing kind of where you are, and getting a read on like, hey, like my skin tends to be more dry in the winter, so I use more creams in the winter versus like in the summer, I'm okay with more lotions that are a little bit, lighter, I think is totally appropriate.
Love it. And we have a question, last question from our Viva Lifer. And if you weren't able to get your question answered, please send it to me and I will get it answered for you. I do have the recording here as well. So waxing, lip waxing, eyebrow waxing, vulvar waxing. Thoughts on, should we do it or shouldn't we? And if we're going to do it, then how do we?
Mhm.
Our most
It's interesting. So I don't think that the textbooks like make a call on this one way or another. And it depends on your skin type and kind of like how sensitive you are, things like that. Especially if we're talking like, bikini wax areas, a lot of times waxing is like less irritating than shaving. Like a lot of times people get more ingrowns, more razor bumps, more irritation from that. And with all the irritation and ingrown hairs, you can get like little cysts, you can get boils, you can get, scarring down there, you can get hyperpigmentation. And so I think that waxing is a good option. Again, it depends. Like there are some risks with it. Sometimes we get hyperpigmentation in areas that are frequently waxed because the wax is hot, and so you're getting kind of like almost like a mini burn whenever you're doing it. So again, making sure that you're going to someone who like knows what they're doing and is trained to do this. But I think it's a perfectly reasonable option. If you're talking about hair removal in general, like anything that we do for that is going to be destructive in nature. So whether you wax and you're pulling, the whole hair bulb out, or you're doing like epilation, which is like using little tools to basically pull the hair bulb out, or you do, like the chemical removers, if you're talking about Nair or stuff like that, that's still putting a chemical that's not removing the bulb, but it's dissolving, and that can be irritating on your skin. So there's not really, it's always picking the lesser of many evils in that sense. So I, as a dermatologist, think that like, if you're able to tolerate it and you get good benefits from it, I think that's totally fine. If you are actively inflamed or, having a lot of other issues, then, maybe that's not the time to wax. So it just kind of depends on what you're doing. But I think always starting with the test spot first, start with a small spot, see if you tolerate it, is a good way to go. But I personally, I like waxing, like I'm totally for it, but it just depends.
Love it. Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you, Viva Lifers and our guests for being here. Dr. B, let us know if we can get in touch with you. How is the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah.
Yep, okay.
Feel free, you can email me. So my personal email is it's my name. So it's Catherine Brahe. So if you see it, just catherinebrahe@gmail.com. I'm happy to take questions. And then you can also always direct message me on my Instagram. I'm on that, managing my page and my dog's page every day. And that one is Alice in Wonderland, which you can find. It was linked in your Instagram as well. But I'm happy to take questions. I think there's not enough dermatologists out there, and I'm really passionate about skincare. So like, if you have questions, like feel free, or if there's another topic that you want to hear about, like let me know. Like I'm happy to come back.
Oh, don't worry. We're going to bring you. You are a quarterly guest as far as I'm concerned. So thank you for being here with us. I'm Dr. Kelly OMD. You can follow me on at Dr. Kelly OMD on Instagram, Viva Life Health Hub as well on Instagram. And as you know, we have different experiences for you. So if you would like to join our inner circle in our group so that you can get this information on a regular basis and protect your mental, spiritual, physical, financial, and emotional health and well-being, then go ahead and look us up. That being said, you know how we sign off. Don't forget to do what? Viva Life. All right, all right. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being a part of the Viva Life experience. I'm Dr. Kelly OMD, board certified OBGYN and healthcare executive. If you like what you heard, then please, please, please go ahead and like, share, and subscribe. The reason why is because we are trying to educate, encourage, and inspire 1 million people to live their healthiest and wealthiest life. And this is what we're bringing you. We're bringing you educational videos. We're bringing you podcasts. We are bringing you webinars with subject matter experts, including myself, about the topics that affect you the most. So go ahead, like, subscribe, and share. We are everywhere. Have a wonderful day. Viva Life.